Once upon a time, in the bustling city of Owerri, there lived a couple whose love story was the envy of all who knew them. Ikenna and Nkemjika, fondly called Ike and Nkem, were the epitome of a perfect couple. Their love was a beacon of light, drawing admiration from everyone around them. They were inseparable. They had met at their final year in the university, where Ike had been Nkem's best friend. At the time, Nkem had been in love with Emeka, a charming young man who had swept her off her feet. But their relationship took a devastating turn when Emeka left her after getting her pregnant. Heartbroken and alone, Nkem had turned to Ike, who stood by her side through the darkest days, even when she chose to terminate the pregnancy, despite his pleas not to. As the years passed, Nkem and Ike's friendship blossomed into a deep and unwavering love, and soon they realized they couldn't live without each other. Their friendship turned into a union, and they took their vows at the altar, promising to stand by each other forever, no matter what. Years later, life went really good for the couple. Ikenna got a good job at a multinational company in the city, and everything was going well. However, Nkem was unable to bear children. At first, it didn't bother them. They would always tell each other that they were enough for each other. However, as the years grew, Ike's parents became more and more impatient. "You barren woman, it's been 5 years since you married my son. All you know is stay at home, eat and sleep. You cannot even bear a child," she said angrily. "But mama," she said sobbing, "I am not God." That evening, Ikenna returned home to find Nkem curled up on the couch, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "What is the matter, my love?" Ike asked, his voice filled with concern as he rushed to her side. "It's been 5 years, Ike. Look at me. I'll be 35 this year. I need a child," Nkem sobbed, burying her face in his chest. "Why am I not able to carry my own babies? What have I done to deserve this kind of life?" "Shh, it's okay," Ike whispered, holding her close. "We'll go to the hospital tomorrow and find out if there's anything wrong, all right?" "Okay," Nkem nodded in approval. At the hospital, the doctor looked at the results intently. "Everything is perfectly fine with the both of you," he said. "There is nothing wrong." But doctor," Nkem's voice trembled, "why haven't we been able to conceive all these years? Is there nothing else we can do?" "There are other options we can explore," the doctor replied gently. "But first, I would like you both to take some time to relax. Stress can sometimes play a huge role in these situations." As they left the hospital, Nkem turned to Ikenna, her eyes filled with desperation. "What if we never have a child, Ikenna? What if it's because of what I did back then?" "Don't say that, Nkem," Ike said firmly, holding her hand. "That was a long time ago. We've moved past that. We'll get through this together no matter what." But Nkem couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at her. She began to seek answers elsewhere, turning to traditional healers, prayer houses, and even making secret visits to seers who promised her a child in exchange for sacrifices. "Nkem, where have you been?" Ikenna asked one night as she returned home very late. "I went to see Ezewanyi," Nkem said quietly, avoiding his gaze. "She says there's a ritual I can do to help us conceive." "Nkem, you know how I feel about these things," Ikenna sighed, rubbing his temple. "I don't want you to hurt yourself with all these superstitions." But what if it works?" Nkem insisted, her eyes pleading. "Ikenna, I'm willing to try anything. I need this. Your mom and sister won't let me have if I don't bear them a child. Our child." Ikenna looked at her dumbfounded, not knowing what to do. He angrily walked out of the house. One day, Ikenna came home to find his house littered with blood. What is the meaning of all this? He asked angrily. Have you gone mad? If you don't stop this madness, I will be forced to send you out of my house, he said, his voice very cold. Ikenna, I am doing this for us, she replied. The prophet I met today said I will conceive in a month. He asked me to get him a big cow and 20 white chickens for sacrifice. I have given him the chickens. Ikenna pulled her into her arms. I love you, Nkem. With or without children, please stop this. Don't do anything that could harm you. Nkem refused to listen to her husband. She continually visited different prophets, native doctors, seers who continually extorted her without getting any results. Because of that, Ikenna grew distant from Nkem. He refused to speak to her about the places she was going again. As time went on, the strain on their marriage grew. Nkem's obsession with having children consumed her, and Ikenna felt helpless. One day, after Nkem had visited a particular herbal doctor who had assured her for 3 months that she was going to conceive after taking his drugs, the doctor said coldly, Madam, your case is very difficult. Oh. It looks like there is something more behind your childlessness that I can't cure. You will have to bring more money so I can go research for more herbs to use. He said, greed written all over his face. Nkem looked at him in disgust. But you promised me those herbs will make me conceive in 2 weeks. This will be the 5th time I'll be paying for more research. Nkem said, frustration written all over her face. She walked out of the place angrily, walking tirelessly on the road for hours, tears streaming down her face. She walked until she found herself standing in front of a car. What is wrong with you, woman? Do you want to die? Nkem fell on the floor, exhausted and frustrated. For the past 15 years, I've been married without any proof. I no longer want to live. Just kill me, she screamed, exhaustion in her voice. The driver alighted from the car, talking calmly to Nkem. Why do you want to take your life like this? Nkem narrated her ordeal to her, crying and weeping heavily. The young woman consoled her. Only the living can have children. Just wait on God. At the right time, it will happen. Nkem returned home from her ordeal on the streets with a new resolve. She decided to stop her desperate search for a child. The endless visits to healers, the sacrifices, the prayers, none of it had brought them the child they longed for. She realized that if she didn't stop, she would lose herself completely, and maybe even Ike. At first, Ike seemed relieved. The tension between them eased, and for a while, it seemed like they might find their way back to each other. But as the months passed, a new bitterness began to take root in Ikenna. The glimmer of hope that had momentarily softened his heart started to fade, replaced by frustration and anger. You're just going to give up now, are you? Ikenna snapped one evening after Nkem gently suggested that they should focus on other aspects of their lives. After everything we've been through, you're just going to stop? Nkem looked at him, hurt by the harshness in his voice. Ike, I'm not giving up. I just want us to be happy again. To live without this constant pain of childbirth and trying to conceive. Happy? Ikenna scoffed. How can we be happy when we are childless? When you can't even give me a child? Nkem felt the sting of his words like a physical blow. It's not my fault, she whispered, tears filling her eyes. We've tried everything. Not everything, Ikenna retorted bitterly. You're the reason we are in this mess. If you hadn't aborted that baby back in the university, maybe you wouldn't be barren now. Nkem recoiled as if he had slapped her. She had never expected Ikenna to use her past against her like this. Ike, please, she began, but he cut her off. No, he said coldly. I don't want to hear it. You've ruined everything. Desperate to save their marriage, Nkem suggested adoption. We could adopt, Ike, she pleaded. There are so many children who need a home, who need love. We could still be a family. But Ikenna refused, his pride wounded. No child of another man's blood will ever be mine, he spat. If we can't have our own, then it's not meant to be. Days turned into weeks, and Ikenna's anger grew even worse. His harsh words tore Nkem's already fragile heart to shreds. Nkem, confused and heartbroken, could barely recognize the man she had married. The same man who had once begged her to stop trying to conceive after their last attempt nearly cost her life had completely changed. You better get pregnant for me, Nkem, or else I will have no choice but to take a second wife, Ikenna had said to her. Nkem's heart sank. She had always known Ikenna was traditional, but he had also been a little rational. The pain became unbearable. One night, while Ikenna slept, she made a decision. The next day, Nkem secretly visited the hospital in search of a way to save her marriage and birth her baby. You do not have any problem with your organs, oh madam, the doctor assured her. Then why can't I get pregnant? Nkem asked, frustration evident on her face. You can try other options, oh, the doctor suggested. Nkem inquired of more options available to her to get pregnant if she didn't want to directly involve her husband. You can try surrogacy with a donor or even IVF, the doctor said. You don't have to go through this alone, he suggested cautiously. Nkem nodded, the weight of her situation pressing down on her. But there was a glimmer of hope in the heart. She could try, oh. She could do this for herself and for Ikenna. As she left the hospital that day, she whispered to herself, I will come back. I will come back. Meanwhile, Ikenna had his own secret plan. He was going to take a second wife that would bear him children and send Nkem away. Desperate to free himself from Nkem, he visited another hospital, hoping to get a report that would declare him free from any blame. His plan was simple. Prove to Nkem that she was the problem and then force her to leave. But fate had other plans. Ikenna, the doctor's voice, was steady but tinged with pity. I'm afraid the tests show you are infertile. There is evidence that you had an illness in your childhood that has affected your fertility. Ikenna's world collapsed around him. The ground felt like it was slipping from under his feet, but he wouldn't admit it. His pride, his very identity was built on being a man. How could he face Nkem or even face himself? Instead of coming clean, Ikenna let the truth fester inside him. His shame curdled into anger, and he channeled all his rage at Nkem, blaming her for their childlessness. Nkem, now more determined than ever, decided to proceed with the IVF procedure in secret. It was her last hope, her final attempt to save her marriage and fulfill her dream of becoming a mother. When the test came back positive, her joy knew no bounds. She imagined the day she would tell Ikenna how happy he would be, how it would mend the cracks in their relationship. That evening, Nkem prepared Ikenna's favorite dish, her heart brimming with anticipation. But as she sat down to dinner, she noticed something different in Ikenna's demeanor. His usual anger was replaced with a strange calmness. After dinner, Ikenna called her over, his face unreadable. Nkem, he began, his voice flat. I've been thinking. I want us to adopt a child. Nkem froze. Adopt? But, but, but why now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I've said different things before, Ikenna continued, his eyes fixed on the floor. But I've come to realize it's the best option for us. Tears welled up in Nkem's eyes. She had wanted to tell him about the pregnancy, but now everything seemed different. Should she tell him? Or should she let this secret stay hidden? At least for the time being. As she stood there, caught between hope and fear, the weight of unspoken truths and hidden plans pressed down on them both, threatening to tear them apart or perhaps bring them together in ways neither of them could have imagined. Nkem's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of Ikenna's words. Adoption? Now, after all the pain, the blame, the heartache, she had been so sure that the news of her pregnancy would change everything, would heal their fractured marriage, but now, faced with Ikenna's sudden proposal, she felt really lost. Ikenna, Nkem began cautiously, her voice trembling. I have something to tell you. He looked up at her, his expression still distant, as if he were bracing himself for whatever she was about to say. What is it, Nkem? She took a deep breath, her hands instinctively resting on her belly. I'm pregnant. For a moment there was only silence. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and full of meaning. Nkem searched Ikenna's face, hoping to see the joy she had imagined, the relief, the love. But instead, she saw something she hadn't expected. Fear. It flickered across the face, quickly masked by a forced smile. That's wonderful news, Nkem, Ikenna replied, his voice strained, as if the words were caught in his throat. He reached out to her, but his touch was hesitant and almost reluctant. Nkem's heart sank. This wasn't how it was supposed to go, at least not how she imagined it. Ikenna, are you happy? I thought this was what you wanted. Is what we wanted. I am happy, he insisted, but his tone lacked conviction. It's just that it's unexpected. After everything, I didn't think. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. His mind was racing, struggling to reconcile the news with the truth he had buried so deeply. Nkem's eyes filled with tears. Ikenna, please, talk to me. What's going on? You're scaring me. Ikenna stood up abruptly, turning his back to her. He couldn't face her. Not now. I need some air, he muttered, heading towards the door. Ikenna! Nkem called after him, desperation creeping into her voice. Don't leave like this, please! But he was already gone, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed through the room. Nkem stood there, alone and trembling, her world crashing down around her. Outside, Ikenna walked aimlessly through the streets, his thoughts a whirlwind of panic and guilt. How could this be happening? Nkem was pregnant. His wife, whom he had blamed for their childlessness, was carrying a child. But how? The truth knocked at him, the doctor's words replaying in his mind. You're infertile and cannot bear a child. He couldn't do it. He couldn't tell Nkem the truth. But what would he do now? The very thing he had feared most had come to pass, and he was trapped in a lie of his own making. Back at home, Nkem sat on the edge of their bed, her tears falling freely now. She didn't understand what was happening, why Ikenna was pulling away when they should be closer than ever. She had gone through the IVF procedure in secret, hoping it would bring them back together. But now, everything felt wrong. Days passed and Ikenna became even more distant. He avoided Nkem, leaving the house early and returning late. When they did speak, his words were cut, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the usual anger, it was something darker, even more scary. One evening, as Nkem sat alone in the living room, Ikenna walked in, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there staring at her. Nkem, he finally whispered, his voice barely audible. There's something I've been meaning to tell you. She looked up, her heart leaping with a mixture of hope and dread. What is it, Ike? He took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the floor. I went to the hospital a while ago to get tested. Ken's breath caught in her throat. Tested? For what? Ikenna swallowed hard, the words heavy on his tongue. For fertility. For fertility, and I found out I am infertile. The room seemed to spin around Nkem as she processed what he had just said. What? No, that can't be, Ikenna. You're lying. I'm not lying, Nkem, he burst out, his voice cracking with emotion. I'm telling you the truth. I can't father children. Nkem shook her head, refusing to believe it. But I'm pregnant, Ikenna. I'm pregnant with your child. He looked at her, his eyes full of anguish. I know, Nkem, and that's why I need you to know the truth. How did this happen? If I'm infertile, then who is the father of this child? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Nkem's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never imagined this scenario, had never thought that the secret she kept might tear them apart in such a brutal way. Don't tell me you're now sleeping around, he asked angrily. No, I can never do that. Ikenna, she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't want to hurt you. I did it for us, for our future. I used the sperm donor, the IVF procedure. It wasn't your child, she said. For a moment, there was only silence. Ikenna's face contorted with a mixture of relief and rage. His emotions too tangled to unravel. He didn't know whether to feel betrayed or grateful, whether to scream or even weep. You did this behind my back? He finally managed to say, his voice trembling with anger. Ikenna was desperate. Nkem cried, her tears flowing freely. You kept pushing me, blaming me. I thought this was the only way to save our marriage, to give us the family we've always wanted. But he's not my child, Ikenna shouted, the truth of it hitting him like a punch to the gut. You went behind my back and conceived the child with another man's sperm. It was never about replacing you, Nkem pleaded. It was about us having a chance at happiness, at a family. I did it for you. I did it for you, for us. Ikenna turned away, unable to look at her. I need time, he muttered, his voice hollow. I need to think. Nkem watched as he walked away. She wondered if they could ever find their way back to each other, or if this was the end of everything they had once hoped for. As Ikenna stepped outside, looking up at the sky, the stars indifferent to the turmoil in his heart, he thought about the future, about the child that wasn't his, but would be a part of his life if he stayed. Could he love a child that wasn't his own? Can he forgive Nkem for what she had done? The questions swirled around him, offering no answers, only more pain. And as the night stretched on, both Ikenna and Nkem were left to grapple with the uncertain future that lay ahead. When he finally came back into the room, he spoke softly to Nkem. I don't think we can ever live together, he said. We have both lied to each other, and this will forever linger in our lives. I'm sorry, but would have to go our separate ways. Nkem didn't utter a word. "You may have to leave," he said, his voice devoid of any emotions. Nkem was speechless. "So, you mean I should leave?" She couldn't imagine that the marriage she had tried so much to save would finally crumble. She tried desperately not to cry. "No problem," Nkem finally answered as she packed her bags and left the house. Nkem left the house, her heart heavy with sorrow. She had tried everything to save their marriage, but in the end, it was their own secrets and lies that tore them apart. She thought about the child growing inside of her, a symbol of their love and desperation. She knew she had to raise the child alone, and she was determined to give them a happy life. The first few weeks were a struggle for Nkem as she tried to get back her life on track. With an intervention of a close friend, she found a wonderful opportunity and things slowly started falling into place. As Nkem regained her footing, she met Uche, a kind and gentle soul who captured her heart and loved her even as she was. Just as she was about closing the chapter of her past, Ikenna reappeared at her doorstep, his eyes filled with remorse. "I'm so sorry for what I did," he pleaded. "I want you back in my life. My life is empty without you." Nkem was taken aback, but she stood firm. "I'm getting married next month, Ikenna," she said, flashing her diamond ring in his face. "I've moved on. Please do too. I'm happy now where I am." Ikenna's face crumbled in devastation as he realized that he had made a terrible mistake. Hope you enjoyed listening to this story. Nkem's story is a testament to the power of truthfulness and resilience. Despite the heartaches and setbacks, she managed to emerge stronger and even more radiant. I'm happy the way the story ended. I hope you are too. Remember, sometimes good things fall apart so better things can fall together. Keep shining and never give up on love and happiness. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories and updates. Like and share this video with someone who needs to see it. Comment below with your thoughts and reflections of what you have learned watching this video. Thank you so much for watching to the end. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.